They found my signature on documents I never signed, my money in accounts I never opened, and my daughter's lawyer claiming I was too senile to manage my own life. My name is Catherine Morrison. I'm 67 years old. And 3 days ago, I discovered my daughter, Elena, has been systematically stealing my identity, draining my accounts, and building a legal case to have me declared incompetent so she could take everything. This is the story of how I fought back and exposed the most elaborate con I never saw coming, orchestrated by the one person I trusted most in this world. It started on a freezing January morning in 2025 when I went to withdraw money from my Bank of America account in Boston and was told I had insufficient funds. I laughed at first because that was impossible. I'm a retired cardiac surgeon with a pension of $8,000 a month, a paid off brownstone in Beacon Hill worth $2.3 million, and investment accounts totaling just over $900,000 that my late husband Marcus had carefully built before his death from a stroke in 2020. The teller, a young woman named Sandra with nervous eyes, suggested I speak with the branch manager immediately. Robert Sullivan had been my banker for 15 years, and the look on his face when he pulled up my accounts made my blood run cold. Mrs. Morrison, he said slowly, your main checking account has a balance of $342. Your savings account shows $1,200. And according to our records, you closed your investment account 6 months ago and transferred everything to an account at Citizens Bank. I told him that was absolutely impossible because I had never closed any accounts and I certainly had never opened anything at Citizens Bank. He turned his computer screen toward me, and there it was, my signature on transfer documents, my initials on account closure forms, even a notarized letter with my supposed signature authorizing Eleanor Marie Morrison, my daughter, as a power of attorney over all my financial affairs. The notary stamp was dated November 14, 2024, a date I remembered perfectly because I had been in Miami that entire week for a medical conference and had the plane tickets and hotel receipts to prove it. Robert's face went pale as I explained this, and he immediately printed every document, circled the discrepancies, and told me in a quiet, serious voice that what I was looking at was identity theft and financial fraud, and I needed to call the police and a lawyer immediately in that order. I drove home in a daze and sat in my kitchen where I had raised Elena after Marcus died, where I had made her breakfast every morning, where I had helped her with homework and listened to her dreams. And I tried to understand how the little girl who used to climb into my lap had turned into someone who would forge my signature and steal my life savings. Then I did what Robert told me. I called the Boston Police Department and filed a report. Then I called Mitchell and Associates, a law firm specializing in elder financial abuse and fraud. The attorney who took my case was a sharp woman in her early 50s named Victoria Chen, who had prosecuted financial exploitation cases for the district attorney's office before going into private practice. She listened to my story, examined the documents Robert had given me, and within an hour had filed emergency motions to freeze all accounts with my name on them and to investigate the Citizens Bank accounts where my money had been transferred. What Victoria discovered over the next 72 hours was so elaborate and calculated that even she, who had seen hundreds of these cases, was shocked by the sophistication of it. Elena hadn't just stolen money. She had been planning this for at least 2 years, slowly and methodically building a legal framework to have me declared mentally incompetent. She had taken me to a doctor I had never heard of, Dr. Philip Brennan, a psychiatrist in Cambridge who had written detailed reports about my supposed cognitive decline, my memory problems, my inability to manage finances, my paranoid delusions about family members stealing from me. The reports were dated over 6 months, September through February, describing monthly appointments I had never attended. Dr. Brennan had diagnosed me with early onset dementia and had recommended in writing that I be placed under legal guardianship for my own protection, with Eleanor listed as the most suitable guardian. Victoria obtained my real medical records from my actual physician, Dr. Sarah Martinez at Massachusetts General Hospital, who had given me a complete cognitive assessment just 3 months ago as part of my annual physical, and I had scored perfectly normal, no signs of dementia, no memory issues, no cognitive decline whatsoever. But it got worse, and I mean so much worse, that when Victoria showed me what she had found, I actually felt my hands go numb. Elena had been accessing my brownstone using a key I had given her years ago for emergencies, and she had been systematically photographing my home to document what she called in her legal filings evidence of hoarding behavior and inability to maintain basic hygiene and self-care. The photos showed dirty dishes in my sink from one morning when I had been running late to a hospital board meeting, showed my bedroom with clothes on a chair which I had laid out the night before, showed my study with stacks of medical journals and books, which is how a study is supposed to look. But in her legal narrative, these were signs of severe mental deterioration. She had recorded phone conversations with me where she would ask deliberately confusing questions and then edit my responses to make me sound confused and disoriented. She had even gotten my sister, Diane, who lives in Seattle, to sign an affidavit saying she was concerned about my mental health. Though when Victoria contacted Diane directly, my sister broke down crying and said Elena had told her I'd been diagnosed with dementia and needed family support for the guardianship process. And Diane had signed the paper thinking she was helping me, not realizing she was helping Elena steal everything. The Citizens Bank account where my $900,000 had been transferred was in Elena's name only with a forged power of attorney document claiming I had authorized her to manage my investments due to my declining mental capacity. She had already withdrawn $420,000, using it to buy a penthouse condo in downtown Boston, a new Range Rover, and according to bank records, she had been making regular payments to someone named Jackson Hayes, who Victoria's investigator discovered was Elena's boyfriend, a man with a criminal record including fraud and identity theft, who had served 18 months in federal prison. I called Elena's number and she answered on the second ring with that sweet voice she used when she wanted something. "Hi, Mom, what's up?" I said very calmly, "Elena, I went to the bank today and discovered some interesting things about my accounts. Would you like to explain what's going on?" There was a pause, then her voice changed completely, dropping the sweetness like a mask falling off her face. "Mom, I was going to talk to you about this, but you've been so confused lately, and Dr. Brennan said it was better to handle things quietly without upsetting you." I told her I had never met any Dr. Brennan and I knew exactly what she had done. The forged documents, the fake medical reports, the stolen money, all of it. Another pause, and then she said something that made my blood freeze. "Mom, you're proving right now that you need help. You're having paranoid delusions. You're accusing me of things that make no sense. This is exactly why I had to take action to protect you and protect your assets before you do something dangerous." I told her I had already filed a police report and hired an attorney and frozen all the accounts. And she laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Mom, by the time this goes to court, I'll have 3 doctors testifying about your dementia. I'll have documented evidence of your declining condition. I'll have statements from family and friends, and a judge is going to put me in charge of everything anyway, so you might as well just accept help now before you embarrass yourself." Then she said, the thing that made me realize this wasn't just about money, she said, "You're 67 years old and alone. Dad's been dead for 5 years. You have no husband. Your friends are all elderly. Who's going to believe you over me? I'm your daughter, and I'm trying to save you from yourself. That's what everyone will see." She was wrong, but she was also more right than I wanted to admit, because when Victoria filed the fraud charges and requested a competency hearing, the judge assigned to the case was Thomas Whitmore, a man in his early 60s who had a reputation, according to Victoria, for being very sympathetic to adult children, caring for aging parents. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, and Victoria warned me that Elena's strategy would be to put me on trial, essentially, to make the case not about the stolen money, but about whether I was competent enough to even understand what had happened. Elena hired an attorney named Richard Thornton, who specialized in elder law and guardianship cases and who had a win rate of over 90% in getting guardianships approved. At the first hearing, I sat on one side of the courtroom with Victoria, while Elena sat on the other side with Thornton and her boyfriend Jackson Hayes, who was wearing an expensive suit and playing the role of concerned supportive partner. Thornton presented Dr. Brennan's reports, the photos of my supposedly deteriorating home, the edited audio recordings of my confused sounding responses, Diane's affidavit, and even a statement from my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who was 83 years old and who apparently told Elena she had seen me wandering around my garden at odd hours talking to myself, which was true because I often walked in my garden early in the morning practicing speeches for the hospital board meetings. I still attended as a consultant. But in Thornton's narrative, this was evidence of dementia-related behavior. Victoria countered with Dr. Martinez's cognitive assessment showing I was completely mentally sound, with my bank statements showing a clear pattern of unauthorized transfers that matched exactly with Elena's suddenly improved lifestyle. Was the forensic analysis of the signatures showing obvious forgery, with my plane tickets and hotel records proving I could not have been at the November 14th notary appointment, and with a deposition from the notary himself, a man named Carlos Rivera, who, when shown my actual signature and my driver's license photo, said he had never seen me before in his life, and the woman who came to his office claiming to be Catherine Morrison was younger, blonde, and approximately 5'6", which was Elena's exact description. But Judge Whitmore seemed skeptical, and he asked me directly, Mrs. Morrison, "Do you remember what you had for breakfast this morning? Do you remember what year your husband died? Do you remember your daughter's birthday?" And I answered every question perfectly, but he kept pushing, asking more and more detailed questions about dates and times and conversations, until Victoria objected and said, "Your Honor, this is not a memory test. My client is a retired cardiac surgeon with an active medical license. She serves on 2 hospital boards. She manages complex medical consultations. The question is not whether she occasionally forgets a detail, but whether someone systematically forged her signature and stole nearly $500,000. Thornton stood up and said, "Your Honor, the question is absolutely about Mrs. Morrison's capacity, because if she lacks the mental competence to recognize that her daughter has been helping her manage finances, she has been unable to manage herself, then these accusations of theft are simply the confused interpretations of a woman who needs care, not legal action against her own child." The judge ordered an independent psychiatric evaluation to be conducted by a court-appointed expert, Dr. Lisa Yamamoto, who had 30 years of experience in competency assessments and who met with me for 4 hours over 2 sessions, conducting every cognitive test imaginable, reviewing my medical history, interviewing people who knew me, including my colleagues at Massachusetts General Hospital, and finally submitting a 23-page report that concluded I showed absolutely no signs of dementia or cognitive impairment and was fully competent to manage my own affairs. But Thornton wasn't done, and at the next hearing, he brought in Dr. Brennan, who testified under oath that he had treated me for 6 months and had documented clear evidence of progressive dementia, and that Dr. Yamamoto's assessment was flawed because she had only seen me during what he called a lucid interval, which was common in dementia patients. Victoria absolutely destroyed him on cross-examination, asking him to provide appointment records with my insurance billing codes, and when he couldn't produce them because of course they didn't exist, asking him to explain how I had attended appointments in Cambridge on dates when I was provably in other cities for medical conferences, asking him why his notes describe me as a woman with short gray hair when I have shoulder-length brown hair, asking him to explain his relationship with Elena and whether she had paid him to write false reports. Dr. Brennan started sweating and stumbling over his answers and finally admitted that Elena had contacted him as a concerned daughter and he had prepared the reports based on her descriptions of my behavior. And he had never actually met me in person. He had been doing what he called a consultative assessment, based on family reports, which he claimed was a legitimate psychiatric practice. Victoria pulled out the American Psychiatric Association guidelines showing that you cannot diagnose someone with dementia without direct examination, and that falsifying medical records is grounds for losing your medical license. Then she submitted a formal complaint to the Massachusetts Board of Registration in Medicine right there in the courtroom. The turning point came when Victoria's investigator found Jackson Hayes' ex-wife, Melissa Hayes, who agreed to testify and who told a story that made everything click into place. Melissa said Jackson was a professional con artist who specialized in targeting women with wealthy elderly parents. He would charm his way into relationships and then slowly convince his girlfriends to help him steal from their families using identity theft and forged documents. He had done this at least 3 times before with previous girlfriends and had successfully stolen over $2 million from various victims before being caught and serving his prison time. Melissa said Jackson had approached Elena 2 years ago at a networking event in Boston, had learned about me and my financial situation, and had groomed Elena over months to see me not as her mother, but as an obstacle to the wealthy lifestyle she deserved. Melissa provided text, messages between Jackson and Elena that Victoria had subpoenaed, messages that showed the entire scheme being planned in detail, with Jackson coaching Elena on exactly what to say to doctors, how to forge documents, how to manipulate family members, how to build a legal case for guardianship. One message from Jackson to Elena said, "Once we get guardianship, we control everything. We can sell the brownstone alone for $2 million plus, liquidate her investments, and she'll never be able to stop us. She'll be declared incompetent and locked in whatever care facility we choose while we live off her money for the rest of our lives." Elena's response was, "But what if she fights it? What if she gets lawyers?" And Jackson wrote, "Who's going to believe a 67-year-old woman claiming her loving daughter is stealing from her? People will think she's paranoid and delusional exactly like we want them to. This is the perfect crime because society expects old people to lose their minds and expects their kids to take care of them." Judge Whitmore read those messages in court and his face changed completely. He looked at Elena with disgust and asked her directly, "Ms. Morrison, did you forge your mother's signature on financial documents? Did you create false medical reports? Did you conspire with Jackson Hayes to steal your mother's money and have her declared incompetent?" Elena's lawyer tried to object, but the judge cut him off and said, "I want to hear from her directly because these text messages suggest a level of premeditated fraud that goes beyond a family dispute." Elena looked at Jackson, who was staring at the floor, and then she looked at me. And I saw something I had never seen in my daughter's eyes before. Pure cold calculation, with no love, no remorse, no humanity, just anger that her plan had failed. She said, "Your Honor, I was trying to protect my mother's assets from her own poor decisions. Yes, I moved some money without telling her, but it was for her own good. Jackson was helping me understand the legal process. We were going to use that money to find her a nice care facility when the time came." The judge said, "Ms. Morrison, you texted, and I quote, 'This is the perfect crime. Does that sound like protecting your mother?'" And Elena couldn't answer. She just sat there in silence while her lawyer whispered frantically in her ear. Judge Whitmore ruled from the bench, which Victoria told me later was extremely rare, but showed how clear-cut the case was. He said, "I find that Catherine Morrison is fully competent and has been the victim of systematic financial fraud and identity theft perpetrated by her daughter Elena Morrison and Jackson Hayes. I am denying any petition for guardianship. I am ordering the immediate return of all stolen funds. I am issuing a restraining order, preventing Elena Morrison and Jackson Hayes from contacting Catherine Morrison or coming within 500 feet of her residence. And I am referring this case to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution." The courtroom was silent, and then Victoria squeezed my hand and whispered, "You won, Catherine. You won everything." But I didn't feel like I had won anything because my daughter was being led out of the courtroom by police officers to be arrested for fraud and conspiracy. And all I could think about was the little girl who used to hold my hand and call me mommy and ask me to read her bedtime stories. And I wondered where that little girl had gone and if she had ever really existed or if I had just imagined the daughter I wanted instead of seeing the person Elena actually was. The district attorney charged Elena with identity theft, forgery, fraud, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, and attempted theft of over $400,000, charges that carried a potential sentence of 12 to 15 years in federal prison. Jackson Hayes was charged with similar crimes, plus his parole violations from his previous conviction, and was looking at 20 years minimum. Dr. Brennan lost his medical license and was charged with fraud and falsifying medical documents. The notary Carlos Rivera claimed he had been deceived by Elena pretending to be me and cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for immunity. My sister Diane was horrified when she learned the truth and apologized 1,000 times, saying Elena had manipulated her with lies about my health. Victoria helped me recover $360,000 of the stolen money, though the other $60,000 was gone, spent on Elena's lifestyle and Jackson's gambling debts. But Victoria said we could sue Elena for that amount, plus damages and legal fees, which totaled another $100,000. The penthouse condo Elena bought was seized and sold. The Range Rover was repossessed. Every asset she had purchased with my money was taken back. The brownstone that Elena had planned to sell after getting guardianship stayed mine. The investment accounts were restored. My life was returned to me piece by piece. But here's what nobody tells you about winning a case like this. The victory feels hollow when you realize what you've lost in the process. 3 months after the trial, I was sitting in my study, surrounded by those medical journals Elena had photographed as evidence of my hoarding when I got a letter from her, smuggled out of the county jail where she was being held awaiting trial. The letter said, "Mom, I know you won't believe me, but I want you to know I loved you. I did. But Jackson showed me how you were going to die someday anyway and leave everything to me. So why should I wait decades living in a cramped apartment, working a job I hate, when I could have the life I deserved right now? You had already lived your life. You had your career and your marriage and your success. It was supposed to be my turn. And yes, I made mistakes in how I tried to get what should have been mine eventually anyway. But does that really make me evil or does it just make me impatient? You could drop the charges, Mom. You could tell the DA you forgive me. And this was all a misunderstanding. We could go back to how things were before, except this time. I would really appreciate everything you've done for me. Please, Mom, please don't let them send me to prison. I'm your daughter, and daughters make mistakes. But mothers always forgive. That's what mothers do. I read that letter 3 times, and then I put it in a folder with all the other evidence of Elena's betrayal. And I wrote back a single sentence. You stopped being my daughter the moment you decided I was worth more to you dead than alive. I never heard from her again. Elena took a plea deal to avoid trial, pleading guilty to fraud and identity theft in exchange for an 8-year sentence with possibility of parole after 5. Jackson Hayes refused to take a deal and went to trial where he was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 18 years. I attended Elena's sentencing hearing because Victoria said the judge would want to hear from me as the victim. And I stood up in that courtroom and I said, Your Honor, my daughter didn't just steal my money. She stole my ability to trust. She stole my peace of mind. She stole my final years that I should be spending enjoying the life I built. And instead, I spend them looking over my shoulder, wondering who else in my life sees me as an ATM or an obstacle or a future inheritance instead of as a human being. But most of all, she stole my memories because now, when I think about her childhood, I can't help but wonder if she was always this calculating. If every I love you, Mom was strategic, if every hug was an investment in future manipulation, she took my past along with trying to take my future. And that is something no prison sentence can give back to me. The judge looked at Elena and said, Ms. Morrison, you betrayed the most fundamental bond that exists between parent and child. You exploited your mother's love and trust to commit calculated fraud. You showed no remorse even when caught, and your letter to your mother asking her to drop charges shows you still don't understand the gravity of what you've done. This court sentences you to 8 years in state prison, and upon release, you will be on probation for 5 years, during which you are forbidden from contacting your mother or any member of her family. And Ms. Morrison, I want to be clear that if you violate this order, you will serve the remainder of your sentence with no possibility of parole. I walked out of that courthouse and drove to the cemetery where Marcus is buried, and I sat by his grave and told him everything. I said, Marcus, our daughter, tried to have me declared insane so she could steal everything we built together. The brownstone we bought when we first got married, the investments you carefully managed, the life you worked so hard to provide. She saw it all as something she deserved to take before I was even dead. And I asked him if he had seen signs of this when Eleanor was growing up, if I had been blind to who she really was, or if Jackson Hayes had corrupted someone who might have been redeemable. But Marcus couldn't answer, and I realized I would never know the truth about when my daughter stopped being my daughter and became a predator waiting for her chance to strike. The hardest part was accepting that I had to grieve someone who was still alive. I had to mourn the loss of my daughter while knowing she was in a prison cell somewhere hating me for defending myself. I had to rebuild my life, knowing that the person I had loved most in the world had been willing to destroy me for money. It's been 8 months now since the trial ended, and I'm learning how to live again. I changed all my locks and installed a security system that Victoria recommended. I moved all my money to new accounts at a different bank where nobody from my past has any information. I updated my will to leave everything to medical charities and research foundations, ensuring that even if something happens to me, Elena will never see a penny of what she tried to steal. I've reconnected with old colleagues from the hospital and started attending social events I had been avoiding. I even started dating a kind man named Robert, who is a retired professor and who knows my whole story and doesn't judge me for it. He told me on our third date that his own son had stolen $50,000 from him years ago, and he understood the unique pain of being betrayed by your own child. I've also started speaking at conferences about elder financial abuse because Victoria told me my case was textbook and could help educate other seniors about the warning signs, the fake medical appointments, the forged documents, the gradual isolation from support systems, the adult children who suddenly become very involved in their parents' finances, all the red flags I missed because I trusted Elna completely. But some nights I still wake up at 3 in the morning and I walk through my brownstone and I remember Elena as a little girl running through these same rooms, playing hide and seek, baking cookies in the kitchen, doing homework at the dining room table. And I wonder if I failed her somehow. If there was a moment when I could have taught her different values or showed her that people matter more than money or helped her become someone who wouldn't betray her own mother for $400,000. Victoria tells me that's survivor's guilt talking. She says Elena made her own choices as an adult and was influenced by a career criminal who knew exactly how to exploit her weaknesses. She says some people are just wired differently and lack the empathy that makes most of us human. She says I did nothing wrong except love my daughter too much and trust her too completely. I'm trying to believe that. But it's hard because mothers are supposed to protect their children even from themselves, and I feel like I failed at that most basic duty. Though Victoria always reminds me that my duty ended when Eleanor turned 18, and every choice after that was hers alone to make and own. My name is Catherine Morrison. I'm 67 years old. I'm a retired cardiac surgeon living in a brownstone in Beacon Hill that my daughter tried to steal by having me declared insane. I'm a survivor of elder financial abuse perpetrated by my own child. I'm someone who fought back and won in court but lost something money can't replace. And I'm here to tell you that if you're experiencing something similar, you need to act immediately because these schemes only get worse with time. Document everything. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Don't let family pressure make you doubt your own sanity. Hire a good lawyer before your abuser does. And understand that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we love most because they know exactly where we're vulnerable. I share my story not for sympathy, but for education. Because elder financial abuse is an epidemic affecting millions of seniors every year, and most cases never get reported because victims are too ashamed to admit their own children are stealing from them. But shame belongs on the perpetrators, not the victims. And we need to talk about this openly so other people can recognize the warning signs before it's too late. Victoria told me that my case has already helped 3 other families catch similar schemes in progress, and that makes everything I went through feel slightly less meaningless. Knowing that maybe Elena's betrayal and my fight back can prevent someone else from losing everything to a child they trusted. If you're listening to this and recognizing patterns in your own life, if you have an adult child who suddenly wants power of attorney, if you're being pressured to sign documents you don't understand, if family members are questioning your mental competence when you know you're fine, if money is disappearing from accounts you can't explain, if you're being isolated from friends and other family members, please understand. These are classic signs of financial exploitation, and you need help immediately. Call Adult Protective Services in your state. Call the police. Call a lawyer who specializes in elder law. Do not wait hoping things will get better because they won't. These schemes are designed to strip you of your autonomy and your assets before you realize what's happening. And if you're someone who has elderly parents, please check on them regularly, not just phone calls, but actual visits where you can observe their living conditions and their mental state. Ask them directly about their finances and whether anyone has been pressuring them to make changes. Make sure they have their own lawyer and financial advisor who work for them, not for other family members. Help them set up protections like 2 signature requirements on large transactions or trusted contact persons at their banks who can alert them to suspicious activity. That's the truth about elder abuse is that it happens in families that look normal from the outside. It happens in wealthy, educated families like mine. It happens when you least expect it from people you most trust. And it destroys not just bank accounts, but the fundamental bonds that hold families together, leaving survivors like me to pick up the pieces of lives that will never be quite whole again. But we survive and we rebuild and we share our stories so that the next person might be saved a little sooner, might lose a little less, might hurt a little less deeply. And that's why I'm telling you all of this, not for revenge against Elena, who is serving her sentence, not for pity for myself, who has recovered financially, even if not emotionally, but for you, whoever you are listening to this right now, wondering if what's happening to you is really abuse or if you're overreacting, I'm here to tell you that you're not crazy. Your instincts are right, and you deserve to be protected from predators, even when those predators share your DNA and call you mom.